Hi, I'm Pablo, and this is episode 221 of the Service Design Show.
We've all heard the hype about AI, but today we are cutting through the noise and getting real about what it means for service design professionals like us. Will we become AI whisperers, or is it back to the drawing board for our whole profession? Let's find out to the Service Design Show, where we invite the brightest minds in our field and explore what's truly needed to design great services that resonate with people, push businesses forward, and honor our planet. Our guest today is Pablo Fernández Vallejo, an educator and service design pioneer. With his pioneering mindset, he managed to introduce the role of service design into the Argentinian government, which was a dream come true from him. As an educator, his design program recently received the prestigious Don Norman Design Award, so he's setting the bar pretty high. He's thinking deeply about the skills that design professionals will need in 2029, and of course beyond, which sort of means that he's basically living in the future. And that's why he's been diving deep into the impact of AI on service design. And he's got some thought-provoking insights to share with us today. So in today's conversation, you are going to learn about the different ways AI can impact the design profession. We will discuss the important questions we should be asking ourselves today about AI in design. We'll also explore how to avoid the mistakes of the sharing economy when implementing AI. And we'll even touch on whether we'll soon be designing services for AI agents as our personas. Plus, we'll dive into the ethics, morals, and biases of large language models. And finally, we'll examine what tasks we can safely outsource to AI and which ones require a more human touch. How Pablo talked about using AI for both automation and augmentation in our design work. He shared some really concrete examples which got me thinking about how I can start applying these concepts in my own projects. So this conversation explores the big picture and gives you practical first steps if you're ready to roll up your sleeves and experiment with AI. Whether you're a tech enthusiast or more of a humanist, I feel this episode will give you a glimpse into the future of service design. In this conversation with Pablo with you, we had a thought-provoking discussion, and I can't wait for you to hear it. Make sure you listen all the way to the end for my closing reflections, where we'll share some of my key takeaways. I'm your host, Mark Fontein, and you are listening to the Service Design Show. Pablo, in the article, one of the articles that you wrote on Medium, you mentioned that your grandparents spoke. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing it correctly, Guarani. A language that AI is very limited trained on. I'm curious, how has that personal connection to your grandparents influenced your perspective on AI?
That's a really good question. I think that we all come to the AI conversation from different places. And coming from Latin America, I'm based in Buenos Aires, in Argentina. And I had this experience of speaking to tools such as ChatGPT, both in English and Spanish. I don't speak Guarani, by the way, but I speak these other two languages, and I can compare the two of them. And that got me questioning about, so what else is out there? What are the other differences for other languages? And I was going to I was doing some research on language availability of resources to train AI, and like skimming through all of those languages, I could see there's this very clear pattern of some languages being more resourceful than others. And and those are languages that are not just very far-flung places that I will never see. There's languages that are part of my history, of my personal history, that we can maybe go a bit more in depth on why I don't speak, or why my dad did not spoke that language that their grandparents spoke, particularly because of how systemic racism works to some degree. But for me, it was important to say that this language is part of the person who is speaking. I think it's important that we make those individual connections to these stories. And for me, it was important in that talk, in that article, to point out that this is, for instance, a language that is part of me to some degree. And to make that visible was important for me.
Before we get too deep in the rabbit hole, based on your research and your experience so far, what do you feel might get lost if we don't represent, or if we overrepresent certain languages and underrepresent others in this case, large language models?
Very pressing question for our times. I think, particularly as we involve tools, what I call upstream, like getting closer and closer to the way we think, not just as a tool that we use for a particular end, but getting them closer to evolve our ideas. I think that we risk getting into a pattern in which we inadvertently are soaking in other ways of seeing the world that are more represented in the data that was used to train and align these models, which is basically kind of like this English-speaking, maybe to some degree Anglo-American way of viewing the world. And if we are not conscious about that, we might be soaking in biases into our own ideas, our own ways of thinking, and defaulting to this kind of more of a monocultural point of view, which mask more like the dominant position of certain languages, of certain ways of viewing the world. And in my article, I talk about this. We cannot wait for the day that AI does not have these biases, because they are inherent to any tool or any system that uses language or meaning. It will have a position every time we interact with them. So we need to be to fight for those biases to be reduced, but at the same time find other ways to deal with tools or systems that are inherently biased.
This spins up a new question in my mind, and I'm curious if you already thought about this. Do you think we'll get AI models that are specifically aimed at exposing other biases? So, like being an AI model that's very proud to have a specific point of view on the world, and that will have, I don't know, more diversity in that way? I can imagine that from a commercial perspective, there might be less interest in developing those kinds of bias models.
It's interesting to see how this will play out. Like, are we going to have different niche for different kind of applications, or different kind of flavors of like AI technology? In this regard, and this strays out a bit beyond my particular area of expertise, but I do think that models tend to be better with the more data they have. So this idea of having like very niche training with like for instance training with just a particular language, you still will need like a whole bunch of data that will only be available if you do it in really big numbers. So I'm a bit wary of, sometimes we see, particularly in my region, I see this conversation a lot of like, okay, we should have maybe like more of a regional model that represents our worldview. And I don't see that really playing out with the scale of data computing that these models have. These are very big industrial enterprises that consume really billions of dollars to train and to deploy. So I don't see a splintering of many different models representing many different worldviews. I see more of a concentration, not in one player, but on a few. So So I don't know. It will be interesting to see how it plays out, but I don't see it as many different regional models competing with each other or exploring different areas of human representation.
I'm not sure if they would be regional, but the hard part about this is that for a large part, at least, again, I'm also not an expert here, but these models represent what has been codified in written language, books, the internet. The question is, to which extent does that also codify culture, values? Maybe it does, but anyway, let's put a pause on this for a second. You are on a podcast called the Service Design Show, and you presented at the recent Service Design Network conference in Helsinki, which already took place last year. And you outlined 7 principles for designing in the age of AI. And that's also one of the Medium articles you have. Can you tell us more what motivated you to develop these principles?
For me, the big question is how. I'm very interested in AI in general as a topic, but of course I had to bring it back to my expertise, which is both service design and education, right? So kind of like the intersection of these 3 things bring me to the question of how will service design practice change with the impact of AI? And for me in particular, that was, I felt a need for this conversation that went beyond changes to the particular workflow of service designers of today. I think oftentimes this conversation is very much centered around what are the kind of things a service designer do on their day-to-day basis, and where could AI fit in today? And what I see on many of these conversations is that it's generally attached to current capabilities of AI models. Like what can you do today with ChatGPT, Claude, I don't know, some image generation technology. But my question was like, hey, my main focus is on training future service designers. So I need to think a bit more into the future, not what could they do today, but what will be needed, for instance, 2029, when a student that will be entering next March will be graduating, or 2030 and beyond. Like I'm training people for a future that is changing in ways that is hard to predict. And I'm not trying to do futurology here, but I am trying to raise those questions of how the discipline will change in the long term. And here, some of the questions do involve how the particular practice of an individual service designer changed. That's part of the principles or part of the conversation. But then I added a couple more layers. One is how will services change, how the way services are consumed and delivered will change. And then additionally, how organizations will change. Because I think that service designers are probably one of the more organization-centered or organization-mindful flavors of the design discipline. And how AI will change the way organizations work will impact us in a very significant way. So I think we should also start to bring those questions into the table. So I was trying to expand this conversation in time, like trying to look a bit more into the future and its impacts, and at different levels, not just the individual, but also services and organization. So that was roughly like how I started or how I tackled this question. And it has a lot to do with understanding also the current dialogues in the discipline. If you read the literature and academic research, like what are also the criticism or the conversations that are happening in our discipline at this time, and also a bit of the AI conversation to understand not just what can be done today, but potential implications down the line as well.
Cool. So how would you describe the current state of designing with AI? Where are we?
A really good question. I think the very, very first distinction that oftentimes we don't make enough is that the intersection between service design and AI is not just a Venn diagram with one dot in the middle. There's a whole lot of things there. And the very first distinction is one thing is to design with AI, that is incorporating AI into the service design processes. And another thing is to design for AI. That is to use AI as a material for the services we produce. To understand that we will be creating experiences or services that incorporate AI as a way of working. So that's the very first distinction. At the individual level, I do think that it's interesting to think of a role, be it service design, for instance, as composed as a collection of different tasks of the things that we do on our day, or a week, or a month, and that this we might have the illusion that the task list of things we do is fixed in time, but this is very sensitive with time. It changes with time. It's not the same thing what we were doing 20 years ago, or if in other disciplines we might do longer time comparisons. This task list or task set changes with time, so we need to start adapting to maybe doing less of some things. Some things will be automated to some degree. That's not complete delegation, but some degree of automation, or being able to do things helped by AI. We are doing this already with using ChatGPT to write an email, or using Myra for clustering post-its. Imagine that at a bigger scale, some things will be aided by AI. Some tasks will remain unchanged, and some other tasks will be new things that we'll be able to do with AI. So maybe the whole story here is the list of things that we will do will change, and how will that change is a $1 million question that we do not know, or it's impossible to predict. But I think we need to start going beyond some maybe more basic formulations like, will AI replace a service designer? I think it's not really helpful to think that like dichotomic way. It's maybe better to think the nuance, like how will our day-to-day change with that? So that at the individual level, I think those are one of the main things, like to be okay with doing less of some things and doing more of other things, or doing some things different by virtue of being augmented by AI. That's kind of like working with AI bit of it, which also has another dimension that we just started the conversation with, which is biases, and like what does it really mean to bring AI to the table, and how can we do that in a responsible and using our critical thinking as a big part of it as well.
You mentioned two things, at least I heard you mention two things about automation and augmentation.
Mm-hmm.
Just for our mental image, can you give some examples what those things might be and how they differ?
Sure. Some tasks will go into this automation dimension, which again is not full delegation into the machine. That means you are able to be more efficient in the way you do it, do more in the same time, or spend less time of your week doing this. Again, the example is like using ChatGPT to help you write a report or an email. You're still writing the report. You're doing it, but maybe you do it faster, or you can edit it faster with using a tool such as that. And then for the augmented, those are things that we are not doing today that we could do with AI. And I think this is a hard to predict category, but my shortcut to it is to think of it in interdisciplinary terms. So like it's a bit like being able to code a prototype without a developer, or be able to interact with sources of data without having a data analyst that did it for us. So we can maybe speak with data in a way that we are not able to do today, because we are able to do it with AI. So I think it really helps us in this interdisciplinary overlap, or like straying a bit outside of our domain. And there's probably other ways that we could do with AI that we cannot do today that I cannot imagine, or probably something more in the fringes that is difficult to predict. But at least those are some of the ideas that I think make it easier to grasp.
So cool. You're thinking about 2029 for the students that start the program. What do you think the impact will be on their professional identity when the boundaries get diluted even more? So when you suddenly have the option to code prototypes, to do some data analysis, like how do you see those students leaving in 4 years?
A really good question. Funny thing we did when we started really thinking about AI at my university, we did kind of like a foresight workshop with our faculty. It was early mid 2023, like April, May 2023. in which we created a set of different scenarios for the future of our discipline. And we ask our faculty like how we got to this scenario, and maybe is it desirable or not, or what should we do to either go there or avoid going there. And they had nuances, but I think like two different ways our discipline we go, and maybe here's service design and design more in general. There's one way of looking at it, which is like a new craft, which is like the people that can, in a way, speak to the machine in this very arcane way of how to craft like experiences using this very powerful tool. So it's like people that really dominates this very specific tools that allow them to do incredible things with AI, like a new craft.
Yeah, exactly. A new craft. That
new
was
craft.
The thing. Yeah.
Exactly. Like a new craft, a very specific thing. And then the other is more like this, a bit more diluted, more generalist, that overlaps with technology, with business, with maybe like a stronger focus for me in human collaboration, human connection, that is maybe detached from talking to this machine. Of course, all of them will be using AI to some degree, probably, but maybe a bit more, much more interdisciplinary, which both of them have risks, or good things or bad things. But one of the risks for this second one is this, dilution into this like interdisciplinary sea of people that are working coming from different angles. So there's probably a few paths there. But I do think that as we transition, it's impossible to know the end point. What we can kind of do is like design the middle steps and the transition for that. Kind of like how I am seeing it, because of also how difficult it is to catch up with tools that are changing the whole time, is not to prioritize the tools themselves, but much more the critical thinking and the strategic and the analytical and creative part that goes on top of that. Because those things, I think it's reasonable to believe that it's going to be much more required, or it will be much more highly valued than the use of tools that will be changing, and there will be to some degree automation happening at that layer of tool usage. This is probably more for interaction design, not necessarily for many of the things that service designers do, but some of them for sure.
So we have this craftsman and this generalist path, let's call it like that. And I completely can see that the critical thinking approach, the knowing what good looks like, developing taste, those will be qualities that will become even more important in the years ahead. So when we focus on that and step away from using the craft aspect around AI, I think in your article, or at least in our exchange, you mentioned that you feel that using AI or understanding the possibilities and limitations of AI at this moment is the thing that comes very close to an unfair advantage. So, like, how do you balance that? Your students, teaching them to be more of a critical thinker and a generalist, and developing what good looks like, and moving away from the technology aspect. And then also saying that understanding that technology aspect is going to give you an unfair advantage. How do you see the balance?
That is the most pressing question in education today, at least how I see it. How to balance or how to incorporate, not just learn about AI, but learn with AI. AI, I think, at least how I see it, should not be just like an isolated new course that we put at a university degree, but rather something that is infused throughout the course, because it does affect the way you learn on most courses. That reality is that it is affecting classrooms around the world. I don't think we are talking about it that much. At least you talk about it maybe in private. We are talking about it, educators, but out in the open, you should be speaking more about how education changes with AI, oftentimes not in good ways. But how do you help to to have a critical use of the tools as you develop your critical thinking is something that is very difficult to do. That many people are trying good things, but we are in a very emerging moments of that, particularly for design education. We don't have a lot of examples of what good looks like in terms of bringing AI into the classroom and in a way that fosters critical thinking and really empowers students to do that. And this comes back to this unfair advantage kind of thing, which is that in order to be able to understand the capabilities of AI, I believe that you should use AI you should accumulate flight hours with the tools in order to understand what can be done and what cannot be done. And the level of knowledge of those tools is very uneven across faculty on different levels in different universities across the world as well.
Yeah, so in order to know what good looks like or to have good taste, you sort of need to be a material expert, right? Otherwise, it's not grounded in, you have, like you said, flight hours. You need to have tasted a lot of different flavors in order to define this is a good combination and this isn't. So it's almost a requirement to become an expert of the material and then step away from it, right?
Absolutely. Like I've seen like researchers or service designers that are doing incredible things with AI because like they've done the research, they've done the interviews. They can then curate information that comes with the AI because they can absolutely pinpoint like, hey, this is not what the user meant when they said X, because they've been there, they have the nuances. How to do that at an educational level for a person that has not gone through all of that, it's a very challenging thing. And we're figuring it out. I think that's kind of like the question. I've been around the world a bit this year trying to answer that question, and we are still in the making.
Yeah, so it's like, I don't know if this is too exaggerated, but it's almost like the invention of the pen or the pencil and paper. And when you're a professional, you better understand how those tools work to do your job. Because if you don't, somebody else will, and they will. And this is the unfair advantage, I think, that you were hinting at. They will figure it out and they will embrace them and they will do the job better, whatever better might look like, faster, cheaper, or actually in quality better, right?
Sure. There's one, sorry, just to add to this, like examples from the past that I love bringing. There's this book by an author called Ethan Mollick called Co-Intelligence that I recommend to anyone interested on AI. He also comes from an education perspective. He's more from a business side. And when talking about education, he said that the closest we had to this like AI disruption in education today is kind of like the calculator. That it was confined to just one subject over the course of like 10, 15 years, because in the beginning they were like super expensive and they were like very cheap. But then humanity discovered how and when bring the calculator into teaching math and how to get the best out of a student, when to keep it out, when to bring it in, how to be more powerful with it at the end of the day. The thing with AI is that it's a similar process, but much faster and across the board, all subjects, all levels, and kind of like from one day to the other. But this is the kind of thing that we are discovering right now, like how to bring it, to which degree, when you leave it out, when you bring it in, and how you do it. And with service design education in particular, I think we are, of course, figuring it out along the way as we do it.
I'm sure that there are still purists out there who have banned the calculator from any math work that they do. And we will have purists in our field as well who swear by the human element and aspects, value in our work. But yeah, I think that for the majority of us, it's either embrace this and learn how to use it, learn the limitations and the possibilities, instead of being a purist. Yeah. You had so many interesting points in your article. And again, we're going to link to this in the show notes, and I recommend everybody reading it. But one of the things that I highlighted in my notes is you argued that AI could lead to commoditization of service experiences. That triggered me. Could you paint us a picture of what that might look like?
This goes to the point of, hey, how we analyze the impact that AI will have on service design from the point of view of how services are consumed and delivered. Okay, so let's maybe step a bit outside of our organization delivering services and think how, for instance, users will be using AI. And in particular, this word that we are talking about a lot lately, which is AI agents, that many of the users of your listeners might be familiar with, and maybe a particular instance of an AI agent, which is an AI assistant. And for me, the easiest way to describe it is Siri or Alexa or OK Google, if it did all the things we dreamed it could do, like really, really ask for something and be able to get it done. So I believe it's we can argue about the time frames, but it's reasonable to believe that within some amount of time, some of these capabilities, these systems will become better, and some users in some industries, in some contexts, will be delegating on those assistants the navigation of at least parts of our services, parts of the journeys of our services. So they will be saying like, hey, just send this email for me, or book this thing for me. Or compare prices between these two things. So maybe in a way, similarly to what happened with e-commerce and goods delivery, we will see a similar thing with AI assistants and the delivery of services. Oftentimes, it won't be just the user navigating our services. It will be an AI assistant that is doing it on behalf of our users. So what happens when that happens? That that assistant won't care how good looking your app is, because it will be having other criteria to use it and other criteria to navigate that. So from the point of view of the companies providing those services, there will be a commoditization in the sense that they will be, and this in the same way as e-commerce, it doesn't care if when you look on Amazon or some other place, it won't care how your store is where it's located, how does it look, what experience, what smell does it have. This is the same thing, but with services, because there will be some assistants getting in the middle, doing part of the work for users, which of course might be a super convenient thing from the point of view of the user, but it might have societal and business consequences at a larger scale as well.
To which extent could this also impact non-digital services?
That's a really good question. I think like the pair part of this is there might be a digital commoditization on the digital space, which will ask for new ways of differentiation. And I think probably the physical experience, the lived experience, will be one of those spaces for differentiation. I haven't researched or discussed this in depth, but maybe as a first thought, I don't think necessarily the physical space will be that much impact by this. That's why it's not the whole journey, but maybe some part of the journey will be affected by this disproportionately, and some others maybe they are where we will focus our value, our creation for organizations will be on making those really good as well, and redesigning the ones that are behaving in a different way now.
I think a lot of us would applaud not having to go through an airline website to actually book a ticket, or finding a new insurance, or booking a restaurant. Like, that's not the part of the journey where value is created or added, unless you're doing it for the experience, which, I don't know, maybe if you're going to a special travel agency that focuses on adventures or something. But for most services, they are already commodities, and they try to differentiate through things that are not really differentiators. So I don't think a lot of us would be against removing those steps and handing them over to our AI friends. And then when you actually enter the plane or the airport or the restaurant, like, those things, they are here, they will be here, and they will become even more important, right?
I absolutely agree. I would put a caveat there, which completely exceeds service designers. It's more of a societal question, which is what happens when there's so much of a concentration of power on the few organizations creating these assistants that will be, in a way, deciding through an algorithm or through something which service will you consume, right? Which airline will you use, or which insurance will you buy, that will create probably a wealth transfer from one sector to the other. And that's something that we need to be aware of. How will that dynamic play out?
Aren't we already living in that world where the power is Google deciding where we land our search results on?
I think yes, but the more that process is automated and taken away from the user browsing through web page, the more acute it becomes. So it's like, yes, it's the same world we live right now, but probably like just tune it up a bit more.
Right now, we have to trust that Google serves us honest results, and then we still have to do the due diligence to go over a website and read and make decisions. And when we delegate more of those decisions to a system, right, that's where trust and values, other elements become even more important. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, for sure. Trust in those systems will become very important. And of course, this it's very important to put nuances here. It's not like everybody will be delegating their whole life to agents tomorrow. It's like this is a very gradual process. It will start in some places, in some industries, some people first. So it's like this is not an overnight thing, So just to make that clear. And we will discover along the way what that means. But I think for most people that we are not working within one of these big AI labs, and we are designing services for companies that will be hired through them, just as we got comfortable at one point with understanding that Google was the homepage of our service in a way, like Lou Down said before. What does it mean when an AI assistant is the homepage of our service, or the entry point to our service? There are some nuances there. It's not the same as Google, but how do we design our experience so that that's the case? And I think that's something we'll have to discover as a discipline, which I'm pretty certain that AI agents is not an easy thing to deploy. An AI agent, I do believe that they will happen outside of our organization before they will happen inside. Because the inside agent, imagine it as AI assistants that are working inside of your organization to perform tasks and all of that. Those are very difficult to deploy. Non-trivial technical feat to have really working AI agents inside of your organization. So you might have the weird situation in which you have requests being done from the outside from AI bots on behalf of the users, being answered by humans on the other side. Maybe an email that was written by a bot is being answered by a human. That's a super crazy thing, but I do see that transition happening for some time until we have maybe more like a machine-to-machine kind of conversation. But that's difficult to predict how it will play out.
I have a software engineering background many years ago, so I sort of understand the way engineers think and work, and they are already for many years thinking in machines that are talking to machines, and they are designing one machine to be easily interoperable, and that is a difficult word, interoperable with another machine. Is the work of service designers also going to shift towards that, where we are going to see machines as another persona who we'll be designing for? And if so, what does it mean?
That's something I think we need to start contemplating. But the nuance I would put there is AI is not a persona. It's not a user of our service. And we'll probably need to create the language for this conversation. Like we're in the very early beginnings of this, and we'll probably have as a discipline to create the language to talk about this. But how I see it today, as we record this, is that I would see AI maybe sometimes as an active participant in the consumption of a service. But of course, the end user, the human behind it is the user. I am afraid if we start like blurring these categories, because that's probably will lead us the wrong way. The person we are designing for is the user, but there might be another actor there that is part of the equation. But I think that relationship, both as we have inside and outside AI agents, we will probably have to start developing a new language to map and to understand that relationship. It's not just a new user.
Yeah. So if we sort of dream a little bit and extrapolate this into the future, we already have issues with digital inequality for people who aren't able to use a mobile phone or a computer. And of course, that is getting less and less. I'm already seeing a future where some people will have, like, if we consider a computer and a phone a tool, some people will have, quote unquote, better AI agents, more capable, more, quote unquote, intelligent. And others won't have AI agents at all. They won't have this tool. This will, like, the chance that this will create even more inequality and even bigger gaps in society, I guess that's not very far-fetched, right?
Absolutely. The last of the principles is about that. I don't go about in depth with this, but it's something I would like to research more, which is that all of the processes we can think about AI, we are either willing to see how because they all, if you don't actively counter systemic differences or injustices or inequalities, if we don't actively fight against them, we're just probably reinforcing them. So there's a lot of imbalances here that will happen, both in terms of like class, language, gender. There's significant amount of evidence piling up that there is gender gaps in adoption of AI technologies. This is a huge conversation we should have, because we cannot have just like a laissez-faire, like with just let it be, because this let it be the way it is. It's not some kind of like neutral, unbiased technological nirvana, but rather quite the contrary. It's not. It will just reinforce existing inequalities in society, and I think in some cases with very worrying consequences.
Like, what are you thinking about?
Like people, like going back to the language difference, there are some people that will not have access to high quality tools that are creating a lot of value. And if you speak English, you will, or other very popular language like Spanish or French or Chinese, you will have very high quality tools at your disposal. If you speak Guarani or Czech or maybe Thai, maybe you will not have the same access to those things. This is like the very basic level, you know. And then some richer countries with more institutional, or languages with better institutional representation, are actively working to have to up the level of AI systems in their local languages. I know great work being done by the Finnish AI institutions and the like, but that's not the same around the world, you know. So that's one of the most basic ones. And then any situation you can pinpoint, if you bring this lens to it, like, hey, what inequalities might be reinforced by this technology being deployed at scale? You'll probably start seeing some patterns, and then it's up to you to do something or not. But it's very difficult to unsee it once you see it.
What would you suggest are some of the questions we need to be having inside our community about this?
Good. And I will use that as a segue to try to bring it very back to service design, because we can go super far. Many things are important to us. I think some of it has to do with the topic we just discussed, which is how are the user journeys being impacted by AI, particularly those happening outside, something we should start considering more. Another dimension, more the organization side, I have 2 points here. The first one is how will the relationship between different departments change by virtue of being able to, each individual person, but each team be able to do more with AI. That will bring to probably some reshuffle of how things are done inside of an organization.
Tensions,
Tensions. I mean, the good side of it is like much more interdisciplinary collaboration. That's like the bright side of it. I think we could collaborate much more.
For those who want it, right? Yeah.
For those who want it. The bad side is some areas will have more power, some will have less power. And here I am particularly concerned about the organizational legitimacy of design within this agenda, because if the AI agenda is being driven just by technology, we can be left out of very important conversations where we have extreme value to bring to the table, because most of the there's a lot of nuances on how technology gets in contact with humans, and that's our specialty. So it cannot be left to be just a technical conversation. So we need to be able to see where is our way of delivering value within that conversation going forward. And then another point that I think is very interesting is regarding our role in deploying this technology, for instance, in more like backend processes, or like creating tools for people to do tasks. And here I have a very brief story to illustrate this. It's from a friend of mine who is developing an internal system for a B2B company in the States. And they had to create a system for a sales representative, basically a tool for a sales representative to be able to sell more products. And they had to bring this tool, and they did, okay, let's bring some AI to this. And they say, okay, let's do this thing that they always do, which is let AI take care of the more analytical part of it. Basically, what before was like having some databases crossing information, decided what to sell to which person. Let's do the AI. Let's let the AI do this, and let's let the human do the human bit, which is a very common thing to say right now, And then when they started doing that, they discover that this analytical part, for many of those sales representatives, was actually not just a part that they did not want to do, but rather the part that gave them joy, that gave them an intellectual challenge, that gave them a representation of who they are. It's not just the selling part, but also this part that gave them joy. And this part had been automated out of existence into just do this. This is the decision that has been made for you. Just execute this decision. And for us as service designer, I think this brings very important questions about how do we bring these technologies in contact with our organizations? How do we avoid designing out the meaningful part of people's jobs as we bring this? Not in a way of like saying, let's not do AI, but how can we redesign the job of other people so it continue being meaningful, continue bringing them joy? And this is something I think we need to be a bit better at doing. And going back to the connections with conversations happening in the service design discipline as a whole, there is a lot of criticism right now on tools such as the journey map or the service blueprint, particularly about how user-centered they are, but how they neglect to account for the experience of workers or the impact on the environment. And I think that here, just in our disciplinary reflector or for our own practice, we need to start thinking, okay, what is the impact of this experience on our workers? Are they having a meaningful job, and what is the impact on the environment? I think we need to redesign our tools a little bit to be able to capture this reality in a more complex way, if we want to have a good impact, not just at the business and the users, but in society at a more general level.
Yes, yeah, a lot to think about. And your last argument made me think, is this the responsibility of us, the design community, to care that people have a meaningful job, or is that the responsibility of the organizations that actually hire the people? But in the recent conversations that I've been having here on the show, it's become pretty clear that it's really up to us to set the standards regarding ethics, regarding morals, regarding what good looks like, around sustainability, the environment. If we wait for others to do it, we're taking a very big gamble. We're taking a very big risk that things might not end up in the way we hope so. So yeah, probably waiting for others to do this isn't the best advice.
Yeah, this is a question I had with colleagues time and time again. I think we all know how constrained we are by the decisions that are taken outside of the control of service designers oftentimes. But I do think we do have a very special spot in this whole conversation, which is we can understand these experiences, we can help, we can bring our disciplinary toolbox to increase the quality of these conversations. Because if we have no way to name these phenomena, we won't be able to take decisions around them. So maybe we won't have the power to make those decisions, but we can make our own part in this for these better decisions to be taken. So I think that's what we need to do, is to be better at capturing this reality and enabling better informed conversations here.
And if we zoom out in your example, or look at your example of somebody not adopting something because that was the meaningful part of their work, what I'm hearing there is I'm already seeing the Airbnb examples and the Uber examples where, like, who was against Uber in the early days, who was against Airbnb in the early days, but like fast forward 5-10 years and we see what the systemic effects are on cities, on local businesses, and we can be very nostalgic about it. But right now, if we don't ask these kinds of questions, for instance, about meaningful work, like fast forward 5-10 years down the line, we will probably have to do a lot of damage control by then.
Absolutely. I think that's a great example. We have to learn from past mistakes of the sharing economy and social media. They might have been great services, great experiences from the point of view of the user, but we all know the consequences that it had. And we cannot repeat the same mistake again. I think in part, this overall systemic turn in service design, like you can see it in the Service Design Global Conference and in general, there's a lot of conversations around how to really bring a systemic lens to our practice, has to do with this being responsible for the impacts of what we do. And I think with the AI conversation, we have very concrete dimensions in which we have a very important role to play in how this plays out in the future of work. In particular, I do think AI will have an impact on a lot of the jobs that we design parts of. Like we design part of an experience from the user, but we are designing a lot of the jobs that are going to be severely impacted by AI. And these are the middle classes of the world we're talking about. This could have like severe institutional consequences if we don't tackle this as a society, you know. And we have a very small but significant role to play in this.
We don't have to look very far to see examples of real impact, for instance, of the sharing economy on our cities, on our businesses. So, assuming that this technology will not have a similar or even greater impact would be quite naive. So, Pablo, out of all the potential aspects you've explored around AI, what's the thing that keeps you up at night?
The thing that keeps me up at night with regards to AI is just this, I think, ever increasing gap between technological development and the societal conversation we are having around it. Like conversations such as this, like there is a lot of conversation about like the impact of work, but still, like I think we need to be better at this, and not like fear mongering, like, oh my God, we're gonna be like, in very concrete terms, we need to be better as a society, and having this oftentimes difficult conversations about what the impact of this will mean. So I think this is kind of like what keeps me up at night. And I try from my very concrete space, which is talking about service design, education, and the like, to try to bring not predictions or not like statements, but rather more like questions, like, hey, I don't know how this will play out, but maybe we can think of it this way. And maybe if it's helpful for you, great. If not, let's think of it a different way. But I think we need to create new categories to grasp some of this phenomena that I think we need to do it fast. And I think we need more conversations in the open, more conversations in depth about this. It's not like just 3 bullets on a LinkedIn post, like, hey, 3 things you should know about this. This is much more complicated stuff, and we need to create those spaces to have these deep conversations.
When you look from my limited perspective at the conversations that are happening around AI in the tech space, in the engineering space, you will find dozens of podcasts, dozens of YouTube videos. Like they're having conversations. I don't know exactly which type of conversations, but the conversation is happening there. I think when we look at design and AI, we're just scratching the surface, right? Yeah. And on the flip side, what do you feel has the biggest potential to have positive impact for us as a field, and maybe enlarging for us as communities, for our organizations?
It has the potential. One of the, I think it doesn't necessarily have to be that way, but it does have the potential of freeing up so much work that we don't like to do, and so much things that we don't like to do, to focus on the human connection, on what is meaningful to us, and what makes a joyous life that is worth living. It's not a given that it will have that effect, and that's why some techno optimism, I think, is really naive about it. But I am hopeful for a future in which this can really not only accelerate, for instance, scientific and technological development, but also free up people to do less of the things that we don't like doing that much, and do more of the ones that we do like doing. And I'm hopeful that's one of the futures that we can build together.
Interesting. We'll be curious to see how that plays out. Pablo, if people want to learn more about you and the work that you do and the conversations that you want to have, like which places would you direct them to?
Thank you. I'm going to be very old school with this. I believe there's a lack of online forums, but at the time of recording,
do you have an AI agent we can talk to?
No, there's no AI version of me, but I'm super open for in the flesh, or at least virtual human to human conversations. You can contact me on LinkedIn. Probably we can put you can look me up. Also on Medium, where I have a bit more of this opportunity to explore some ideas and thoughts in depth, both in English and sometimes as well in Spanish. I think those are the main 2 places, and just invite me to conversations about this, like the service design, AI, and education. How do we go about doing this? I want for this to be a shared journey of learning, and I'm out to be there learning with others.
Nice. Speaking about learning, we like to end our conversations with better questions than we started. So what is a question that you would like us to think about after this episode?
But oftentimes when we think about these topics, it can get a bit gloomy and a bit overwhelming. So I would invite our listeners to put that aside and maybe think like, hey, what can I do today to be actively doing something that gets me closer to have a better conversation tomorrow about these topics? And that's probably not doom scrolling about AI things on some social network. It's much more about like doing things with AI. I think that's, for me, it's really the best advice I could give, is to get people familiar with the tools for the things that matter to you today, not just some random poem about something you don't do on your day-to-day life unless you're a poet. What can you do in your day-to-day life that gets you closer to this conversation? I think that for me has been a very useful way to not get into this nervous about the future thinking mood, and much more into acting on the present. It's important that we can do that as we go through these moments.
Yeah. Rolling up the sleeves and getting your hands dirty. And how can you do that? How can you bring this closer to, how can we bring this closer to our day-to-day so that we actually know the flavors that we're talking about?
Absolutely.
Super interesting. Cool. Pablo, thanks so much for coming on. This was inspiring. This feels like the beginning instead of the end of the conversation. So we'll probably have to revisit in a year or 2 or 3 and see how far we've got.
Looking forward to that.
Thinking about how AI might change the way we see ourselves as design professionals. If we start using AI for more and more tasks, what will that mean for our core skill and identity? It's a question we all need to consider as AI becomes more prevalent in our work. I also appreciated Pablo's reminder that AI isn't neutral, and we need to be mindful of the biases it can introduce. It's a call to action for all of us to be even more critical and thoughtful in how we use AI. Big thanks to Pablo for sharing his insights and sparking this important conversation. If you enjoyed today's conversation, you can do me one big favor. Click the like button on this video and leave a short comment if you haven't done so already. Not to feed the algorithms, but to let me know whether or not we are on the right track by addressing topics like this. Finally, before we part ways, please take a moment to reflect and celebrate that by joining us today, you have directed your attention towards learning and growing as a professional. So, from everyone who you are going to impact through your work, thank you for taking the time and making the commitment. My name is Mark Fontijn, and I look forward to having you with us again for a new conversation on the Service Design Show. Take care and see you soon.